At 2:13 a.m., the medical ward was almost silent. Monitors hummed softly. Exhausted nurses moved between rooms. Most patients were asleep. Then every screen in the ward went black. 1 second later, security alarms began sounding across the hospital. Nobody understood what was happening. Not the doctors. Not the nurses. Not even hospital security. In the middle of the confusion stood a quiet night nurse named Emily Carter. She did not panic. She did not ask questions. She simply looked toward the entrance as if she already knew something was coming. Outside, headlights appeared through the darkness. Dozens of federal vehicles rolled onto hospital property. Within minutes, armed agents were surrounding the building. The doctors thought Emily was just another night nurse. They were wrong. And before sunrise, the entire hospital would learn why a federal convoy had arrived to clear an entire ward for one woman nobody had ever truly noticed. The night shift at St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center had settled into its usual rhythm. Outside, the city slept beneath a cold spring rain. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors while monitors hummed softly in darkened rooms. Most visitors had gone home hours earlier. The hallways were quieter now, occupied only by nurses, doctors, and patients fighting battles nobody else could see. On the fourth-floor medical ward, Nurse Emily Carter moved from room to room carrying a tablet and a patient chart. She wasn't the kind of person people remembered. She wore the same dark blue scrubs as everyone else. Her hair was tied back neatly. She never spoke louder than necessary. She never told stories about herself. She never joined gossip at the nurses' station. To most people, Emily was simply another night nurse. Reliable. Quiet. Forgettable. The younger nurses often described her with a single word. Nice. That was all. Nobody knew much else. Nobody asked. And Emily seemed perfectly comfortable with that. She stepped into room 401 and checked the oxygen levels of an elderly pneumonia patient. After making a small adjustment, she listened to his lungs, updated his chart, and quietly reassured him that his breathing sounded better than it had the night before. The man smiled with relief. A few minutes later, she was in room 403 helping a diabetic patient whose blood sugar levels had been fluctuating throughout the day. Then room 405. Then room 406. Then room 408. The work never stopped. Yet Emily never seemed rushed. While other nurses moved quickly from task to task, Emily maintained the same calm pace no matter how busy the ward became. It wasn't slow. It wasn't casual. It was controlled. As if she always knew exactly how much time she had. As if pressure simply didn't affect her. Near the nurses' station, 2 younger staff members were discussing weekend plans while entering patient notes. One of them noticed Emily passing by. "Emily, can you help with Mr. Sanders again?" she asked. "He keeps asking questions about his treatment." Emily nodded. Of course. She didn't mention that she was already covering additional patients. She didn't mention she had missed her break. She simply walked toward the room. Inside, 72-year-old Robert Sanders sat awake in bed staring at the monitor beside him. The moment Emily entered, some of the tension left his face. "Nurse Carter," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think they're telling me everything?" Emily pulled a chair beside the bed. For the next 10 minutes, she listened patiently while the man explained his fears. When she finally left, his shoulders looked lighter. His breathing was calmer. Nothing about the interaction would appear in a medical report. Nobody would praise her for it. But Emily understood something many people in healthcare forgot. Sometimes patients needed information. Sometimes they needed medication. And sometimes they simply needed someone willing to sit down and listen. Back at the nurses' station, emergency department physician Dr. Michael Reeves arrived carrying several patient files. He was respected throughout the hospital. Smart. Experienced. Confident. People listened when he spoke. He glanced through paperwork while walking. "Can somebody get me the latest labs from room 412? He asked. Emily was already holding them. She handed over the results. Dr. Reeves accepted the papers. "Thanks." He paused. For a brief second he searched for her name. "Emily." She smiled politely. "You're welcome, Doctor." The physician continued walking. He wasn't being disrespectful. He genuinely couldn't remember her very well. The truth was that most people couldn't. Emily had worked at St. Catherine's for nearly 18 months. Yet many staff members still treated her like she was new. The strange thing was that Emily never seemed bothered by it. Midnight arrived. The ward grew quieter. Rain tapped softly against distant windows. Several patients slept. Others watched television in dark rooms. The atmosphere felt peaceful. Until the alarm sounded. A sharp electronic tone suddenly echoed through the hallway. Room 414. Respiratory distress. Within seconds, nurses began moving toward the room. Emily was already there. She entered before anyone else. One quick look told her most of what she needed to know. The patient was struggling to breathe. Oxygen levels were dropping. The situation was deteriorating fast. Emily immediately adjusted positioning, checked the airway, and began preparing emergency equipment. When additional staff arrived, she calmly relayed critical information. No panic. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Just clear decisions. One after another. By the time Dr. Reeves entered the room, Emily had already completed half the tasks he was about to order. The physician quickly took control of the situation. Within minutes, the patient stabilized. The crisis passed. Everyone exhaled in relief. As staff left the room, several congratulated the doctor for his quick response. Dr. Reeves accepted the compliments and continued his rounds. Emily quietly disinfected equipment. Nobody noticed. Nobody realized how quickly she had assessed the problem. Nobody realized she had anticipated the physician's instructions before he spoke them. Nobody thought much about it at all. Because that was Emily Carter's life. She was the person who quietly solved problems before they became disasters. The person who noticed details others missed. The person who remained calm while everyone else rushed. And because she never demanded attention, attention rarely found her. At 1:30 in the morning, Emily stepped into an empty supply room to organize inventory. The task wasn't urgent. Most nurses would have left it for another shift. Emily preferred things prepared. Predictable. Ready. As she worked, she noticed something unusual. A cabinet door near the back of the room wasn't fully closed. It seemed insignificant. But Emily stopped. Something about it felt wrong. The cabinet had been locked earlier. Now it wasn't. She examined it carefully. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing appeared damaged. Yet a faint crease formed between her eyebrows. Most people would have ignored it. Emily didn't. She quietly made a note of the observation and continued working. A few minutes later, she returned to the hallway. The ward looked normal, peaceful, safe, but for reasons she couldn't quite explain. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the hospital seemed peaceful again. The respiratory emergency had passed. Most patients were asleep. The rain outside continued falling steadily against the windows. For everyone else on the fourth-floor medical ward, the night had returned to normal. For Emily Carter, it had not. She couldn't explain exactly why. Years of experience had taught her something important. Major problems rarely announced themselves. They arrived quietly, as small details, small inconsistencies, small things that did not fit. And tonight, there were too many of them. Emily stood at the nurse's station reviewing patient charts when she noticed a man stepping out of the elevator. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. He wore a dark jacket, carried no visible bags, walked with purpose. Hospitals received visitors at all hours. But something about him immediately caught her attention. The man never looked toward patient rooms. Instead, his eyes moved across security cameras, exit signs, hallway intersections. The behavior lasted only seconds. Then he disappeared around a corner. Most people would never have noticed. Emily did. She quietly memorized his face. Several minutes later, she checked the visitor log. No matching registration. That alone wasn't alarming. But it added another piece to a growing puzzle. A puzzle she didn't yet understand. At 2:17 a.m., one of the ward computers suddenly froze. The The screen went black before restarting. The nurse using it frowned. Hospital systems are acting strange tonight. Another nurse nodded. IT said they're checking something. Emily listened without commenting. The timing bothered her. The visitor. The unlocked cabinet. Now network issues. Individually, none of them meant much. Together, they began forming a pattern. The problem was that she didn't know what pattern. 20 minutes later, she walked through the corridor conducting routine patient checks. As she approached the stairwell entrance, she noticed the door wasn't fully closed. Again, a small thing, easy to ignore. Yet hospitals relied heavily on controlled access after midnight. Doors were supposed to remain secured. Emily opened it carefully. The stairwell was empty. Silent. Nothing moved. Still, she examined the doorframe. Fresh scuff marks covered part of the metal surface, as if something had recently been forced against it. Her expression remained calm. But internally, another warning light switched on. Something was wrong. She simply didn't know what. Back at the nurse's station, Dr. Reeves was reviewing new admissions. He glanced up when Emily approached. "Doctor, have there been any security issues reported tonight?" The physician looked surprised. "Not that I've heard." Emily nodded. "Probably nothing." Dr. Reeves returned to his paperwork. The conversation ended there. Emily didn't push the issue. She understood something many people didn't. If you brought concerns without evidence, people stopped listening. So she kept watching, kept collecting information, kept waiting. At approximately 3 o'clock, an ambulance arrived carrying a transfer patient from another county hospital. The arrival itself wasn't unusual. The circumstances were. The patient came with limited records, minimal information. Several sections of documentation were completely restricted. Even stranger, 2 men in dark suits briefly accompanied the transfer team before leaving immediately after the patient was admitted. Emily noticed the exchange while assisting nearby. One of the suited men quietly spoke to hospital administration. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Then both men left. No introductions. No explanations. Nothing. The patient was assigned to room 417. Emily remembered the room number. She didn't know why. Something simply told her she should. As the hours passed, tension slowly settled over the hospital. Invisible. Difficult to describe. Like distant thunder before a storm. Several nurses mentioned feeling uneasy. One blamed the weather. Another blamed exhaustion. Emily said nothing. At 3:41 a.m., she reviewed surveillance monitors near a security desk while delivering paperwork. Only briefly. Long enough to notice something unusual. The same unidentified visitor she had seen earlier appeared on a camera near a service corridor. Then disappeared. A minute later, he appeared on a different floor. Then vanished again. Security cameras should have made tracking someone easy. Instead, his movements seemed deliberate. Controlled. As if he knew exactly where blind spots existed. That observation finally pushed Emily to file a formal security concern. The report was simple. Professional. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. An unidentified individual. Restricted area movement. Potential access violations. The security supervisor thanked her and promised to investigate. Emily returned to work. But she already knew what would happen. The report would sit in a queue. Someone would review it later. Probably much later. By then, it might not matter. Around 4 o'clock, the hospital grew even quieter. The darkest part of the night. The hour when fatigue became dangerous. The hour when mistakes happened. Emily stood beside a window overlooking the parking lot. Rain streaked across the glass. Most of the lot sat empty beneath yellow security lights. Then she noticed something. A black SUV parked near the far edge of the property. The vehicle wasn't violating any rules. But its engine remained running. No one exited. No one entered. It simply sat there. Waiting. Emily checked the time. 4 minutes later, the SUV drove away. Slowly. Without headlights. A chill settled in her stomach. Not fear. Recognition. The feeling that events were moving. Pieces were aligning. She just couldn't see the entire picture yet. Behind her, the hospital continued operating normally. Patients slept. Machines beeped. Doctors completed paperwork. Nobody realized how much Emily was observing. Nobody realized how carefully she was tracking every inconsistency. And nobody knew that somewhere beyond the hospital walls, people were already moving toward St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center. People searching for something. Or someone. The storm that would soon engulf the hospital had already begun. Only Emily seemed capable of hearing it approach. As dawn slowly crept closer, she looked once more toward room 417. The mysterious transfer patient remained inside. The door closed. The lights dim. The room quiet. Yet for reasons she couldn't explain, Emily felt certain that everything happening tonight somehow led back to that room. At 4:18 a.m., Emily Carter finally entered room 417. The patient had arrived nearly an hour earlier, but the ward had remained busy with admissions and routine care. Now the hallway was quiet. The room was dimly lit. Only the glow of monitoring equipment illuminated the bed. The patient appeared to be in his late 40s. Strong build. Several visible injuries. A fractured arm. Heavy bruising across his ribs. Multiple stitches near his hairline. According to the chart, he had been injured during a vehicle accident several counties away. Yet something about the report felt incomplete. Emily had read thousands of patient files throughout her career. This one felt different. Large portions were restricted. Entire sections had been removed. Several fields displayed authorization codes instead of medical notes. She had never seen documentation quite like it. The man was awake when she entered. His eyes immediately met hers. Alert. Focused. Not the eyes of someone heavily medicated. Not the eyes of an ordinary accident victim. "Good morning," Emily said calmly. "I'm Nurse Carter." The patient studied her for a second, then nodded. "Morning." His voice sounded tired, but controlled, like a man accustomed to pain. Emily checked his vital signs. Everything appeared stable. As she adjusted equipment, she noticed something partially hidden beneath the hospital blanket. A scar. Long and precise. The type often associated with military injuries. She said nothing. The patient said nothing. The silence lingered for a moment. Then he spoke. "Has anyone been asking about me?" Emily looked up. "Not that I'm aware of." The man nodded slowly. His expression revealed nothing. Yet the question itself stayed with her. Most patients worried about treatment, family, recovery. This man seemed worried about being found. After completing her assessment, Emily left the room. Outside, she paused briefly. The feeling returned. The same feeling she had experienced all night. Small details connecting together. The visitor. The security issues. The restricted records. The unidentified SUV. Now this patient. The pieces still didn't form a complete picture. But they were moving closer. At 4:42 a.m., hospital administrator Karen Mitchell arrived unexpectedly on the ward. That alone was unusual. Administrators rarely appeared before sunrise. Emily watched as Mitchell quietly entered room 417. A minute later, two men wearing dark business suits joined her. The door closed. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Then all three left. No explanations. No announcements. Nothing. One of the suited men briefly looked down the hallway. His eyes scanned exits. Security cameras. Staff locations. The behavior immediately reminded Emily of the unidentified visitor from earlier. Professional. Methodical. Intentional. When the men disappeared into the elevator, Emily noticed something else. Neither wore hospital identification. Neither signed visitor paperwork. Yet security had allowed them access. That detail bothered her more than anything else. Near 5 o'clock, the ward's network system briefly failed again. Computer terminals froze. Patient records became temporarily unavailable. The outage lasted less than 2 minutes. But during those 2 minutes, Several security cameras also disconnected. Hospital IT blamed a technical malfunction. Emily wasn't convinced. By now, the pattern felt impossible to ignore. Someone was testing something. Or preparing for something. The question was what? At 5:16 a.m., Emily stepped into the medication room to restock supplies. While organizing inventory, she heard voices in the hallway. Low. Urgent. She recognized neither speaker. Instinctively, she moved closer to the partially open door. Only fragments reached her. Still inside. Before daylight. No mistakes. The conversation ended abruptly. Footsteps moved away. When Emily stepped into the corridor, nobody remained. Only silence. For a long moment she stood there thinking. The words themselves meant little. Yet combined with everything else, they felt significant. The situation was becoming harder to dismiss as coincidence. Meanwhile, inside room 417, the mysterious patient remained awake. Waiting. Watching. As if he understood something nobody else did. At 5:40 a.m., Emily performed another routine check. This time the patient spoke before she could. "How long have you worked nights?" Emily looked at him. "A while." He nodded. "Then you know when something feels wrong." The statement wasn't a question. Emily remained silent. The man gave a faint smile. Not friendly. Not threatening. Simply knowing. Then he looked toward the door. Things are moving faster than expected. Emily felt a slight tightening in her chest. What things? The patient said nothing. His eyes shifted toward the hallway. Toward the rest of the sleeping ward. Toward people completely unaware of what might be approaching. Several seconds passed. Finally, he spoke. "Just be careful today, Nurse Carter." Emily studied him. But his expression revealed nothing more. When she left the room, dawn was beginning to lighten the horizon beyond the hospital windows. A new day was arriving. Yet instead of relief, she felt growing concern. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew one thing with certainty. The patient in room 417 wasn't the cause of the coming crisis. He was the reason for it. And before the morning was over, whatever had been quietly building throughout the night would finally reach the hospital. At 6:07 a.m., the first sign of real trouble appeared. Not a gunshot. Not an alarm. A locked security door simply opened when it should not have. Most people never noticed. Emily did. She was updating patient charts when she saw a notification briefly appear on a nearby terminal. Access override authorized. Then it disappeared. The problem was simple. No override had been scheduled. No maintenance team had been announced. Yet somewhere inside the hospital, a secure door had just been opened remotely. Emily immediately contacted security. The dispatcher answered. "We're looking into several system issues already." Several. The word stayed with her. This was no longer a single malfunction. Something larger was happening. As morning staff slowly began arriving, tension spread through the building. Computer systems slowed again. Several internal phones stopped working. Badge readers became unreliable. Individually, none of the problems were catastrophic. Together, they created confusion. And confusion was dangerous inside a hospital. Especially one full of vulnerable patients. At 6:31 a.m., Emily noticed two unfamiliar men walking through a service corridor near the ward. Neither wore medical uniforms. Neither carried identification. When a nurse greeted them, they ignored her completely. Then they disappeared around a corner. Minutes later, security cameras covering that corridor temporarily went offline. Emily's concern deepened. She wasn't imagining things anymore. The pattern was real. Someone was moving through the hospital. Someone who knew exactly where to go. At 6:45 a.m., she entered room 417. The patient was sitting upright, watching the door, as if he had been expecting her. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked quietly. Emily remained professional. "I think something unusual is happening." The man nodded. For several seconds neither spoke. Then he said something that made her stop. "If things get complicated, Stay with your patients." Emily looked at him carefully. "What do you know?" The patient glanced toward the hallway. "A lot." "Then tell me." "I can't." His answer came immediately. Not hesitant. Not fearful. Certain. Before Emily could ask another question, a hospital-wide announcement interrupted them. The speakers crackled. Then silence. The message never played. A few seconds later, every overhead speaker in the ward shut off completely. The patient closed his eyes briefly, as if another prediction had just come true. When Emily left the room, she found nurses gathering around the station. Everyone was noticing the problems now. Questions filled the hallway. Nobody had answers. At 7:02 a.m., the first real panic began. A patient transporter reported seeing an unauthorized individual inside a restricted treatment area. Security responded. But when officers arrived, the person was gone. Vanished. No footage. No identification. Nothing. The hospital suddenly felt different. Less like a place of healing. More like a place being watched. Emily continued working. Checking medications. Helping patients. Keeping routines normal. Outwardly, she appeared calm. Inside, she was calculating. Observing. Preparing. Not because she knew exactly what was coming, but because experience had taught her a simple rule. When enough warning signs appear, the crisis has usually already started. Most people just haven't realized it yet. At 7:18 a.m., a nurse rushed toward the station. Her face had gone pale. "Room 417, she said. "The patient is gone." The hallway became silent. Emily stood immediately. Together, they hurried toward the room. The bed was empty. Monitors remained attached. The 4-line hung disconnected. The patient had left less than a minute earlier. No one had seen him leave. No one knew where he had gone. For the first time all night, Emily felt the situation moving beyond uncertainty. The crisis had arrived. And somewhere inside the hospital, the man from room 417 was now missing. Whatever happened next would affect everyone on the ward. The disappearance of the patient from room 417 changed everything. Within minutes, hospital administration ordered an internal search. Security officers moved through stairwells and service corridors. Department supervisors received urgent calls. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some believed the patient had wandered away. Others suspected a psychiatric episode. A few quietly wondered whether something far more serious was happening. Emily focused on the only thing she could control: the patients. Because while administrators searched and staff speculated, hundreds of vulnerable people still needed care. Medications still had to be given. Vitals still had to be checked. Lives still depended on routine. And routine was beginning to collapse. At 7:35 a.m., another network outage struck the hospital. This one lasted longer. Several electronic records became inaccessible. Communication between departments slowed dramatically. The emergency department reported delays. Laboratory services reported delays. Radiology reported delays. The entire hospital was beginning to feel pressure. Emily noticed fear spreading among the newer staff. Not panic. Not yet. But uncertainty. And uncertainty often became panic if nobody provided direction. So she quietly stepped into the gap. Without announcing herself. Without seeking authority. She simply started solving problems. She created handwritten medication tracking sheets. Organized patient priorities. Assigned simple tasks to overwhelmed nurses. Verified critical treatments manually. One decision at a time. One problem at a time. People naturally began following her lead. Not because she demanded it. Because it worked. Around 8 o'clock, Dr. Reeves finally approached her. The physician looked exhausted. "How are you staying this calm?" he asked. Emily glanced toward the ward. "Patients are watching us." The doctor followed her gaze. Several worried patients were observing staff movements from their rooms. Emily continued. "If we panic, they panic." Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. The answer seemed simple, yet somehow important. For the first time, he looked at her differently. Not as the quiet nurse who blended into the background, but as someone unusually steady under pressure. A few minutes later, security reported another development. The missing patient from room 417 still had not been located. No confirmed sightings. No camera footage. Nothing. It was as if he had disappeared inside the hospital. The announcement unsettled everyone. Everyone except Emily. Because deep down, she suspected something. The patient had not run away. He had moved intentionally. And if that was true, then he was probably trying to avoid something. Or someone. At 8:17 a.m., a frightened nursing assistant approached Emily. "There are strangers on the 3rd floor." Emily looked up. "What kind of strangers?" "I don't know." The assistant swallowed nervously. "They keep asking questions about patients." Emily felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The threat was no longer theoretical. People were actively searching the building. The only question was why. Despite the growing tension, she remained focused on her responsibilities. An elderly patient needed help walking. A cardiac patient required monitoring. A family member needed reassurance. One by one, Emily handled each problem. Calmly. Professionally. Without revealing how closely she was tracking everything else. Because leadership wasn't always about giving orders. Sometimes it meant creating stability while others searched for it. By mid-morning, the ward felt like a dam under pressure. Still standing. Still functioning. But increasingly strained. And somewhere beyond the hospital corridors, events were moving toward a confrontation nobody could yet see. The staff believed they were dealing with a missing patient. Emily was no longer convinced. Whatever had begun during the night was becoming something much larger. And sooner or later, it would reach the 4th floor. By late morning, the atmosphere inside St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center had changed completely. The hospital was still operating. Patients were still receiving treatment. Doctors were still moving between rooms. Yet beneath the appearance of normality, tension had settled over the building like a heavy fog. Nobody could ignore it anymore. Shortly after 10 o'clock, security announced temporary access restrictions across multiple departments. Several entrances were closed. Visitors were redirected. Elevator movement became limited. The official explanation mentioned technical concerns. Very few people believed it. Especially Emily. She had spent the entire night watching warning signs appear one after another. Now the hospital was beginning to react. The problem was that it seemed to be reacting too late. At 10:22 a.m., another report arrived. 2 unidentified individuals had been seen near a restricted records office. When security responded, they found nothing. No suspects. No evidence. Only more questions. Inside the ward, patients were becoming anxious. Many had noticed unusual activity in the hallways. Some had seen security officers moving quickly between floors. Others had overheard conversations. Fear spreads easily in hospitals. Emily understood that. So she continued doing what she had done all night. She focused on people. One patient at a time. One room at a time. One problem at a time. An elderly woman recovering from surgery asked whether something dangerous was happening. Emily adjusted her blanket. Checked her medication. Then answered honestly. "Right now you're safe." The woman nodded. The reassurance mattered. Even if Emily herself was becoming less certain. At approximately 11 o'clock, internal communications failed again. This time, entire sections of the hospital lost phone access. Staff were forced to relay messages manually. Departments became isolated. Coordination slowed. Confusion increased. The hospital was becoming fragmented. And fragmented systems were easier to exploit. Emily knew that. Though nobody around her understood why she seemed so concerned. Near noon, Dr. Reeves joined her outside the nurses' station. He lowered his voice. "I just spoke with administration." Emily looked up. They don't know what's happening either. That admission worried her more than anything else. Hospitals were built around procedures, plans, chains of command. If leadership was confused, everyone else was operating blind. A few minutes later, security officers appeared on the floor. Their instructions were simple. Remain alert. Report unusual activity. Avoid restricted areas. The guidance sounded routine. Yet their expressions told a different story. These were experienced officers. And they looked nervous. Emily noticed every detail. The way they scanned hallways. The way they checked exits. The way they kept touching their radios. Something serious was approaching. Everyone could feel it now. Nobody could stop it. At 12:17 p.m., a patient transporter rushed onto the ward carrying urgent information. The missing man from room 417 had reportedly been seen in a lower-level service corridor. Only briefly. Then he disappeared again. The sighting triggered another search. More officers. More confusion. More pressure. Emily listened quietly. The patient was still moving. Still avoiding capture. Which meant he was either running from the threat or trying to stay ahead of it. Neither possibility was comforting. That afternoon, while checking supplies, Emily found herself standing alone in a quiet hallway. For the first time all day, she stopped moving. Stopped working. Stopped solving problems. Just for a moment. She looked out a nearby window. Rain clouds had finally begun clearing. Sunlight touched part of the parking lot. Everything outside looked normal. Peaceful. The contrast felt strange. Because inside the hospital, a storm was still building. And she could feel its weight growing heavier with every passing hour. When her radio suddenly crackled with another security update, Emily turned back toward the ward. The moment of quiet was over. The crisis was still advancing. And before the day ended, choices would have to be made. Choices that would place people in danger. Choices that would reveal truths nobody expected. Including the truth about the quiet night nurse almost everyone had underestimated. The decision arrived just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Until then, the crisis had felt distant. Threatening. Unclear. Now it became personal. A security supervisor entered the ward carrying new instructions from administration. Several non-critical patients would be relocated to another section of the hospital. The process would begin immediately. Staff members started preparing transfers. Families gathered belongings. Wheelchairs appeared in hallways. For a brief moment, it looked as though the hospital was finally regaining control. Then another problem emerged. Not every patient could be moved. Several people on the ward were too unstable, too fragile, too dependent on specialized equipment. They would have to remain where they were. And if conditions worsened, they could become trapped. The realization spread quietly through the staff. Nobody wanted to say it aloud. But everyone understood. If something happened, the sickest patients would be the most vulnerable. Emily reviewed the transfer list. Then the list of patients staying behind. Her eyes moved carefully from one name to another. Some required constant monitoring. Others could not survive a rushed evacuation. Leaving them unattended was not an option. A younger nurse approached her. "We should probably move with the evacuation group." Emily looked down the hallway. Several rooms remained occupied. Several patients remained helpless. "No," she said calmly. The nurse stared at her. "What do you mean?" Emily folded the paperwork. "Those patients still need care." The younger woman glanced toward the rooms. Then back toward Emily. The answer wasn't easy. Everyone wanted safety. Everyone wanted distance from the growing uncertainty. Yet somebody had to stay. Somebody had to remain responsible. Emily had already made her choice. By mid-afternoon, portions of the ward had become noticeably quieter. Transferred patients were gone. Visitors had been restricted. Hallways looked emptier than before. The silence felt unnatural. Almost heavy. Inside room 406, an elderly man recovering from heart complications asked a question Emily had heard many times throughout her career. "Are things going to be okay?" She adjusted his blanket, checked his monitor, then met his eyes. "We're going to take care of you." It wasn't a promise that everything would be fine. It was a promise that he wouldn't face it alone. The difference mattered. Hours passed. Pressure continued building. Security activity increased. More reports circulated through the hospital. More rumors. More uncertainty. Still, Emily remained focused. Medication rounds. Patient assessments. Documentation. The basics. The things that mattered. Because when chaos approaches, people often search for dramatic solutions. Emily believed in something simpler. Do the next necessary thing. Then the next. Then the next. Late that afternoon, Dr. Reeves found her checking supplies. The physician looked tired. More tired than she had ever seen him. "I heard you're staying on the ward." Emily nodded. "So are you." A faint smile crossed his face. "Fair point." For several seconds neither spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Who are you, really?" The question lingered between them. Emily continued organizing supplies. Finally she answered, "Just a nurse." Dr. Reeves looked unconvinced. But he didn't press further. Because somewhere deep down, he already knew the answer was incomplete. As evening approached, the hospital prepared for another long night. Yet unlike the previous night, nobody believed things were normal anymore. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The only difference was that Emily seemed prepared to face it. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted authority. But because people under her care needed someone who would stay when leaving became easier. And when the final confrontation arrived, that choice would matter more than anyone realized. At 6:43 p.m., everything changed. The first sign appeared outside the hospital. Several staff members standing near the windows noticed flashing lights entering the property. At first they assumed it was another ambulance. Then more vehicles appeared. And more. Within moments, an entire convoy was moving through the front entrance. Dark SUVs. Federal vehicles. Marked and unmarked units. They arrived with purpose. Not urgency. Not panic. Purpose. People throughout the hospital stopped what they were doing. Doctors looked out windows. Nurses gathered near hallways. Patients watched from their rooms. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Security officers received instructions over their radios. Hospital administrators rushed toward the main lobby. The atmosphere changed instantly. For nearly 24 hours, confusion had dominated the hospital. Now confusion was being replaced by control. Whoever had arrived clearly knew exactly what they were doing. On the 4th floor, Emily stood beside the nurses' station when one of the security supervisors hurried past. His expression was completely different from before. The nervous uncertainty was gone. Someone had taken charge. A few minutes later, elevators began opening across multiple floors. Federal agents emerged in organized teams. They moved quickly but calmly. Some secured entrances. Others coordinated with hospital leadership. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody created panic. Yet everyone understood something significant was happening. Dr. Reeves stepped beside Emily. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Emily looked toward the elevator doors. "I don't know." It was technically true. She didn't know the full story. But she knew enough to recognize professionalism when she saw it. The operation unfolding around them had been planned long before the convoy arrived. At 7:02 p.m., a group of senior federal officials entered the ward. The hallway fell silent. Even experienced physicians stopped talking. One official carried a photograph. Another reviewed information on a tablet. They moved directly toward the nurses' station. Not toward administration. Not toward security. Toward the medical staff. A senior agent looked around the ward. His eyes settled on Emily. For a brief second, nobody noticed. Then the agent walked straight toward her. The entire station became silent. Doctors exchanged confused glances. Nurses stopped working. The agent came to a stop. "Ms. Carter." It was not a question. Emily nodded once. The man immediately straightened his posture. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Respect. Professional respect. The kind usually reserved for senior leadership. The kind that could not be faked. Several staff members noticed it instantly. The agent spoke quietly. "We've secured the building." Emily listened without reacting. "The subject has been located." Again, she simply nodded. No surprise. No visible relief. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet everyone watching felt the same question forming. Why was a senior federal official reporting directly to a night nurse? The agent handed her a sealed document, then stepped aside. Not above her. Not in front of her. Aside. As though acknowledging authority without announcing it. Dr. Reeves noticed. So did the charge nurse. So did nearly everyone else nearby. For the first time since the crisis began, people were looking at Emily differently. Not because she had revealed anything. Not because she had explained anything. Because others were revealing it for her. The convoy had arrived. The operation was ending. And the quiet nurse nobody had noticed was suddenly standing at the center of it all. Without saying a single word. The questions everyone had been asking for nearly a day were finally beginning to receive answers. Not all of them, but enough. Shortly after the federal team secured the hospital, administrators were briefed behind closed doors. Information spread carefully, only on a need-to-know basis. The missing patient from room 417 had been located in an unused service area beneath the hospital. He had not been hiding from hospital staff. He had been avoiding individuals who had been searching for him since before his arrival. The unauthorized visitors. The security breaches. The system failures. All of it had been connected. Federal investigators had been tracking the situation for months. The injured patient was a protected witness linked to a major criminal investigation. His transfer to St. Catherine's had been intentionally concealed. Unfortunately, someone had discovered where he was being treated. That discovery had triggered everything that followed. The surveillance. The infiltration attempts. The search inside the hospital. And now, finally, the federal response. By 8 o'clock that evening, agents had detained several suspects connected to the operation. No shots had been fired. No patients had been harmed. No dramatic confrontation had occurred. Because the goal had never been violence. The goal had been prevention. And prevention rarely looked dramatic. It looked like long hours. Careful decisions. Quiet professionals doing their jobs. Exactly the kind of work Emily understood best. As hospital operations slowly stabilized, Dr. Reeves found himself standing near the nurses' station again. This time he wasn't watching the agents. He was watching Emily. She was doing exactly what she had been doing before the convoy arrived. Reviewing charts. Checking medications. Helping patients. Nothing had changed. At least not for her. The physician finally approached. "I heard part of the briefing." Emily looked up. Then returned to her paperwork. Dr. Reeves hesitated. "You're FBI." It wasn't really a question. Emily remained silent for several seconds. Then she gave the smallest nod. The physician laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because suddenly so many things made sense. The calmness. The awareness. The unusual observations. The way she always seemed one step ahead of unfolding events. None of it had been accidental. Yet even now, Emily showed no interest in discussing it. No pride. No performance. No explanation. Just work. The same work she had been doing from the beginning. For Dr. Reeves, that was perhaps the most surprising part. Most people would have welcomed the attention. Emily seemed uncomfortable with it. At 8:37 p.m., one of the senior federal officials crossed the ward again. This time several staff members watched openly. The official stopped beside Emily. "Everything is complete." Emily nodded. "Any injuries?" "No." A brief pause followed. Then the official extended his hand. Emily shook it. Nothing more. No ceremony. No announcement. No speech. But everyone nearby understood what they had witnessed. Professionals recognizing another professional. Respect earned long before tonight. The crisis that had dominated the hospital was finally ending. The threat was gone. The suspects were in custody. The witness was safe. And the quiet nurse who had spent months working among them had helped hold everything together without ever asking for credit. The operation was over. Yet Emily seemed relieved for only one reason. Her patients were safe. Everything else appeared secondary. Perhaps it always had been. The next morning felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows. Visitors returned. Phones rang. Doctors resumed rounds. Patients asked for breakfast. Life continued. If someone had walked into St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center that morning, they would never have guessed that a federal operation had unfolded inside the building less than 12 hours earlier. Most signs of the crisis had already disappeared. The vehicles were gone. The agents were gone. The tension was gone. Only memories remained. And questions. Many questions. On the fourth-floor ward, nurses quietly discussed the events of the previous day. Some talked about the convoy. Others talked about the missing patient. Most talked about Emily, the quiet nurse nobody had truly known. Yet even now, Emily seemed determined to return to normal. She arrived for work exactly on time, collected her patient assignments, reviewed charts, and began another shift. No announcement. No special treatment. No recognition requested. Just work. Around mid-morning, Dr. Reeves joined her outside room 405. For a moment neither spoke. Then the physician smiled. "You could have told us." Emily looked down the hallway. It wasn't necessary. The answer sounded simple, but it perfectly captured who she was. For nearly 2 years she had worked beside them, not pretending to be someone else, not hiding behind a false identity, simply choosing not to talk about parts of her life that didn't matter to patient care. The realization changed how many people viewed her. Not because she was FBI, because she had never used it, never leveraged it, never sought attention from it. Near noon, a black government vehicle briefly stopped outside the hospital entrance. Most people never noticed. Emily did. A senior federal official stepped out, entered the building, spoke with administration for less than 5 minutes, then crossed the ward one final time. Several staff members watched from a distance. The official stopped beside Emily. Neither exchanged many words. The man simply handed her a small envelope. Emily accepted it. The official nodded once, then left. No speech, no ceremony, no public acknowledgement. Just quiet respect. After he departed, Emily placed the unopened envelope inside her locker. She never mentioned it, never explained it, and nobody asked, because by now they understood. Some people did important work without needing recognition. Emily was one of them. That evening, as her shift finally ended, she walked through the same corridors she had crossed countless times before. Patients thanked her. Nurses waved goodbye. Doctors nodded respectfully. Small gestures. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Yet everything felt different. Not because Emily had changed. Because everyone else had. For the first time, they saw the person who had been standing beside them all along. The woman who remained calm during uncertainty. The woman who noticed what others missed. The woman who stayed when leaving would have been easier. As Emily stepped outside, the hospital stood quiet behind her. Safe. Peaceful. Ordinary. Exactly as it should be. She glanced back only once. Then turned and walked toward the parking lot. No spotlight followed her. No crowd gathered around her. No headlines would mention her name. And if Emily Carter had any preference at all, that was probably how she wanted it. Because long before anyone learned she was FBI, she had already decided who she was. A nurse. A protector. A professional. The rest was simply information. And tomorrow, she would return to work like any other day. The hospital would move forward. The patients would move forward. And the story of the quiet night nurse would quietly fade into memory. But for those who had witnessed it, one truth would remain. They thought she was just a nurse. They were wrong. The end.